God's chosen ones. Whatever you did, it worked. You won. It's already yours. Vertical bar, ElioraPath. Are you tired of feeling like you're fighting a war that everyone else says is already over? Have you been carrying wounds from battles that left no visible scars? Do you wake up some mornings wondering if God has forgotten your name entirely? Listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is going to shatter every lie you've been carrying about your life. You didn't stumble across this message by accident. You didn't click on this video by chance. Heaven whispered your name and pulled you here for this exact moment. I know you're exhausted. I know you've been fighting battles in silence, carrying burdens that would have crushed lesser souls, enduring betrayals that cut so deep they changed the way you breathe. You feel forgotten, overlooked, like you've been walking through a war zone while everyone else got to live in peacetime. But here's the truth that's about to change everything. You already won. You already won. And you didn't even know it. See, there's something that happens in nature. Scientists call it post-battle freeze. When an animal has already outrun its predator, already escaped the threat, its nervous system is still locked in survival mode. The body keeps trembling, keeps looking over its shoulder, keeps waiting for the next attack, even though the danger has already left the field. That's where you are right now, chosen one. You're still flinching, still scanning the horizon for the next blow, still bracing yourself for disappointment. But the enemy already packed up and went home. The verdict was written in heaven before you even knew there was a trial. Before we go deeper into this revelation, I want to take a moment to thank every single one of you who has supported this message through super thanks. Your generosity means more than you know. You're not just donating, you're helping spread light to others who feel alone in their calling. Whether you give or not, I'm deeply grateful for your presence here, your support, your time, your attention. It all matters. And if this message resonates with your soul, go ahead and sow a seed of faith, knowing that what you give in love returns to you multiplied. Now, you're still looking over your shoulder. But tell me something. What exactly are you looking for? The enemy's already left the field. So why do you still flinch when good things start happening? Why do you still doubt when doors begin to open? Because you've been living in the echo of a war that's already over. What you called punishment was actually preparation. What felt like abandonment was divine positioning. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment you thought you couldn't take another step, it wasn't breaking you down. It was building something unbreakable inside you. If this is hitting your spirit right now, if something deep inside you is stirring, comment 77 below, the number of divine confirmation. And stay to the end, because something is coming that you've waited your whole life to hear. You already won. Now let me show you exactly what that victory looks like. Have you ever wondered why your darkest moments felt like they were being watched? Why your breakdown seemed to echo in rooms where no one else was standing? What if I told you that while everyone else was studying your fall, heaven was documenting your resurrection? You thought you were collapsing, but you were constructing. Listen, I need you to understand something that's going to flip everything you believed about your suffering. While they sat in their circles, analyzing your pain like it was entertainment, gossiping about your struggles like they were reading the morning news, heaven was taking detailed notes. But not the kind of notes they were taking. They documented your weakness. Heaven documented your strength. They recorded your stumbles. Heaven recorded your refusal to stay down. They celebrated your silence. Heaven celebrated your strategy. You see, there's something called divine misdirection in Scripture. God has always hidden his greatest works in plain sight. Moses was hidden in a basket that floated past Pharaoh's daughter. David was anointed king while he still smelled like sheep. Jesus was born in a stable while the world was looking for palaces. And you, chosen one, you were being constructed while everyone thought you were being destroyed. In 1 Samuel 16:7, the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. While they were measuring your external circumstances, God was measuring your internal fortitude. You want to know what was really happening during those sleepless nights? While you were crying in the bathroom at 2 a.m., thinking you were falling apart, heaven was drafting blueprints. While you were on your knees, feeling like you couldn't take another step, the angels were taking measurements for your throne. They mocked your silence, not realizing you were blueprinting a kingdom they'd never qualify to enter. Have you ever felt completely unseen, like your pain was invisible to everyone who mattered? Like you were screaming underwater while everyone else was breathing just fine? Type, "I kept building," in the comments if you refused to quit in silence. If you kept showing up even when no one was watching. If you kept believing even when the evidence suggested you shouldn't. Here's what they missed while they were busy writing your obituary. You weren't just enduring, you were evolving. You weren't just surviving, you were being sanctified. Every tear that fell was actually laying foundation stones. Every disappointment was actually a divine appointment with your destiny. Look at Job. The enemy thought he was destroying him, taking away his wealth, his health, his family. But God was allowing the pressure because he knew what Job was made of. Job 23:10 says, "But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold." Job wasn't being demolished, he was being refined. And that's exactly what was happening to you. While they were watching you break down on the outside, heaven was building a monument on the inside, a monument to persistence, a monument to faith under fire, a monument to the kind of strength that can only be forged in the furnace of adversity. You want proof? Look at where you are right now, still here, still breathing, still believing, still building. After everything they threw at you, after every door they slammed, after every relationship they poisoned, after every opportunity they blocked, you're still here. That's not luck, that's divine architecture. They thought your silence meant surrender. They didn't know you were in the laboratory of the Lord, having your spiritual DNA rewritten. They thought your isolation meant abandonment. They didn't know God was giving you private tutorials on how to walk in power they'd never understand. Remember when Nehemiah rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem? His enemies mocked him every single day. Sanballat and Tobiah stood at a distance, pointing fingers, making jokes, predicting failure. But Nehemiah 6:3 records his response. "I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you?" That was you, carrying on a great project while they tried to distract you with their noise. You couldn't come down to their level because you were building something they couldn't even see from where they stood. Whatever you did during those dark seasons, it worked. The prayers that felt like they bounced off the ceiling, they worked. The tears that felt like they fell into an empty void, they worked. The holding on when every muscle in your body wanted to let go, it worked. You weren't collapsing, you were constructing. And now they're about to see exactly what you've been building. But here's what I need you to understand before we go any deeper. What they built with noise, you built with silence. What they built with crowds, you built with solitude. What they built for show, you built for eternity. And there's something terrifying about a person who builds in secret, because when they finally reveal what they've constructed, it's already too late to compete. You know what they never tell you about victory? The greatest wins happen in rooms with no audience, in moments with no applause, in seasons when the only witness to your progress is heaven itself. They were watching you, studying your every move, taking notes on what they thought was your downfall. They saw the tears, they saw the isolation, They saw you carrying weight that would have crushed ordinary people, and they smiled. They actually smiled because they thought they were watching your collapse in real time. But here's what they missed. Here's the part that's going to make your enemies lose sleep tonight. They thought you were losing, but they didn't see your training ground. While they were busy pointing fingers at your supposed defeat, the universe was doing the heavy lifting. Every rejection was redirecting you towards something they couldn't even imagine. Every closed door was protecting you from rooms that would have diminished your calling. Every betrayal was removing people who were never qualified to witness your resurrection. You built in silence, dear one, not because you were ashamed, but because sacred work requires sacred space. The blueprint was never meant to be public, because what God was constructing in you was too precious for their commentary, too powerful for their interference. Think about Frederick Douglass, born into slavery, beaten for even looking at a book, yet he taught himself to read and write in secret. While his oppressors thought they had broken him, he was breaking their entire system from the inside out. He didn't announce his education. He didn't seek applause for his progress. He simply built his mind one stolen lesson at a time, until the day he stood before Congress and rewrote history with his words. They never saw it coming, because the blueprint was never public. Joseph spent 13 years in slavery and prison, 13 years of what looked like absolute defeat. His brothers thought they had destroyed him. Potiphar's wife thought she had ruined him. The cupbearer forgot him entirely. But while they were celebrating his supposed downfall, heaven was positioning him to control the economy of the known world. The prison wasn't his punishment, it was his graduate school. The pit wasn't his grave, it was his launching pad. Genesis 50:20 says it perfectly. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. They meant evil, but God meant elevation. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years behind bars, 27 years of what the world called defeat. His enemies thought they had silenced him, buried him, erased him from history. But while they were celebrating, he was becoming. In that cell, away from the cameras, away from the crowds, away from the noise, he was forgiving his captors before they even knew they needed forgiveness. He was preparing to lead a nation while they thought they had destroyed a man. The day he walked out of that prison, he didn't just walk into freedom, he walked into destiny, because the blueprint was never public. Now let me ask you something that's going to cut deep. How many times have you built something beautiful, achieved something significant, overcame something impossible, and nobody clapped? How many victories have you won that never made it to anyone's social media feed? How many battles have you conquered in the privacy of your own heart, with no witnesses except heaven? Have you ever won something with no applause? Type unseen victory if you know what it feels like to triumph in silence. Here's what I need you to understand. Chosen one, your greatest work was never meant for their approval. The blueprint of your destiny was drawn in heaven's boardroom, not in their living room. While they were busy analyzing your external circumstances, God was rewiring your internal circuitry. They think they're still dealing with the old you, the one who needed their validation, the one who crumbled under pressure, the one who broke when they pushed. But that version of you died, beloved. That version of you was buried in the silence, cremated in the isolation, and what rose from those ashes is something they have no category for. You are not who you were when this trial started. You are not even who you were last year, last month, last week. Every day in the wilderness was changing your DNA, rewiring your responses, upgrading your spiritual software. While they were mocking your process, heaven was perfecting your prototype. Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven." Your season of hiding is over. Your time of building in silence has ended. And now, Now it's time for the unveiling. They can't deny what you've become because they can't understand how you became it. They weren't invited to the construction site. They weren't given access to the blueprints. They weren't qualified to oversee the renovation. All they can do now is stand there, mouths open, trying to figure out when you stopped being their victim and started being their victor. The universe was your contractor, heaven was your architect, and every setback was just another building permit being approved for your elevation. But here's where it gets dangerous for them. Here's where their comfortable little world starts to crumble. If God could do this with you, in the dark, in the silence, in the secret place, what else is he building right now that they can't see? Your victory isn't just your vindication, it's their wake-up call. They can't fight what they can't find. You know what's driving them absolutely crazy right now? They keep swinging at a target that's no longer there. They're throwing punches at a person who died in silence while they were busy celebrating what they thought was your defeat. They're still operating with outdated intelligence, still using old strategies against an enemy who's already evacuated the battlefield. Listen to me carefully, because this is where it gets supernatural. You didn't just get better, you didn't just heal, you didn't just level up like some video game character collecting points. A number, what happened to you was dimensional. You shifted into a frequency they can't even detect anymore. Think about it. When was the last time their insults actually stung? When was the last time their rejection actually mattered? When was the last time you felt the need to defend yourself against people who are still arguing with ghosts? You can't remember, can you? Because that version of you, the one who used to react, who used to care what they thought, who used to beg for their acceptance, that person doesn't live here anymore. They're still fighting a version of you that doesn't exist anymore. The Bible gives us powerful examples of this dimensional shift. Look at David. When King Saul was hunting him through the wilderness, throwing spears, setting traps, mobilizing entire armies. But here's what's fascinating. Saul could never truly see David. 1 Samuel tells us that the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and from that moment he was spiritually blind to the Anointed One standing right in front of him. David wasn't hiding in caves because he was weak. He was operating from a dimension Saul couldn't access. The prophet Samuel had already anointed David as king. Heaven had already shifted his frequency, and Saul was chasing shadows. Or consider Moses. When he fled Egypt after killing the Egyptian, Pharaoh saw him as a fugitive, a criminal, a man on the run. For 40 years, Moses disappeared into the wilderness of Midian. But something happened during those decades of silence. When Moses returned, he wasn't the same man. He carried the power of the burning bush, the authority of I am that I am, the ability to split seas and bring down empires. The Egyptians were still looking for the old Moses, the palace prince who lost his temper. They couldn't comprehend the dimensional shift that had occurred in the desert. But here's the most powerful example. When Christ rose from the dead, even his own disciples struggled to recognize him. Mary Magdalene thought he was the gardener. The disciples on the road to Emmaus walked with him for miles without knowing who he was. Why? Because resurrection isn't just about coming back to life. It's about entering a completely different dimension of existence. The old body, the old limitations, the old vulnerabilities, they were gone. He could appear in locked rooms, disappear at will, exist in a form that transcended physical reality. That's what happened to you. You died to who you were, and you rose in a form they can't track. The old you, the one they manipulated, the one they controlled, the one they could predict and provoke. That person was buried so deep they'll never find the grave. And now, when they try to use the old triggers, when they pull the same strings, when they press the buttons that used to make you dance, nothing happens. Because those buttons are connected to a control panel that no longer exists. They're playing chess with shadows. You're not on the board anymore. But here's what's really messing with their minds. You didn't announce this transformation. You didn't hold a press conference, didn't post about your spiritual evolution, didn't explain your dimensional shift. You just disappeared from their reality. One day they could hurt you. The next day their weapons passed right through you like you were made of light. This is why they're so frustrated, so confused, so desperate to pull you back into the old drama. They need you to exist at their level, in their dimension, playing by their rules. But you've graduated to a frequency where their chaos can't reach, where their opinions carry no weight, where their approval is as irrelevant as yesterday's weather forecast. The transformation isn't cosmetic, it's cosmic. It's not about changing your hair or your clothes or your address. It's about changing the very essence of how you exist in the world. You're still you, but you're you operating from a place of such deep spiritual authority that the old versions of conflict simply bounce off. Think about this. When someone tries to start an argument with you now, what happens? You don't get triggered, you get curious. You watch them perform, like you're observing a play you've already seen. You're not emotionally invested in the outcome because you're operating from a dimension where their drama is just noise. And that terrifies them because people only feel powerful when they know your weak spots, when they can predict your reactions, when they can push your buttons and watch you respond. But what happens when the buttons are disconnected? What happens when the weak spots have been transformed into strong points? What happens when your reactions are so measured, so peaceful, so spiritually mature that you become unrecognizable to the chaos they're trying to create? They realize they're fighting air. Comment, shifted, if you know you've outgrown who they thought you were, if you've experienced this dimensional transformation, if you're living proof that God doesn't just upgrade His chosen ones, He translates them into entirely new realms of existence. But here's what I need you to understand as we move forward. This dimensional shift comes with a responsibility, because now that you're operating from this higher frequency, you have access to power they can't even comprehend. You know what nobody talks about when they tell you to break generational curses? They don't tell you that some curses have been feeding off your bloodline for over 100 years. They don't tell you that addiction, poverty, abuse, abandonment, these aren't just bad habits passed down. They're spiritual parasites that have been gorging themselves on your family's pain for decades. But here's what's about to blow your mind. Chosen one. You weren't just born into this mess by accident. You were strategically placed, divinely positioned. Heaven's secret weapon smuggled into enemy territory. Because someone had to be the last one. Someone had to be the final generation that would carry this weight, and that someone was you. The enemy made a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was placing another victim in the lineup, another soul to drain, another life to destroy. What he didn't realize is that he was actually signing his own eviction notice. Because you, dear warrior, you carry something your ancestors never had. You carry the DNA of the one who said, "It is finished." Let me paint you a picture of what really happened. Every time your great-grandmother drank herself to sleep, every time your grandfather's fists spoke louder than his words, every time poverty knocked on your family's door like a landlord from hell, that curse was celebrating. It thought it had found a permanent home, a bloodline it could ride for generations. But then you showed up, you, with your stubborn refusal to repeat the pattern. You, with your decision to choose healing over heritage. You, who looked at centuries of family dysfunction and said two words that shook the gates of hell. Not me. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 54:17, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." But here's what that really means. Chosen one. It doesn't just mean the weapons won't work. It means they'll backfire so spectacularly that your enemies will regret ever trying to use them against you. Every curse that touched your bloodline just became evidence in heaven's courtroom. Every generational sin that tried to claim you just became a testimony of God's power to transform poison into purpose. You didn't just survive what should have destroyed you. You turned it into your platform. Think about this, and I need you to really let this penetrate your spirit. When you chose recovery over addiction, when you chose love over anger, when you chose prosperity over poverty mindset, you weren't just making personal choices, you were rewriting the spiritual constitution of your entire family tree. Every tear you cried in therapy rewrote the DNA of your descendants. Every time you chose forgiveness instead of bitterness, you sent shockwaves through your bloodline that your great-great-grandchildren will benefit from. Every boundary you set, every toxic relationship you ended, every time you said, "Enough," you were performing surgery on your family's spiritual genetics. But here's where it gets really wild. The curses that once fed off your family's pain, they're starving now because you cut off their food supply. You stopped feeding them with your dysfunction, your trauma responses, your unconscious repetition of destructive patterns. And a curse without a host, chosen one, is like a parasite without blood. It dies. You want to know why you felt so alone in your healing journey? Why family members turned against you when you started getting therapy? Why people got angry when you stopped enabling their dysfunction? Because healing is disruptive to the systems that profit from your pain. Your breakthrough threatened their breakdown, your freedom exposed their bondage, your courage revealed their cowardice. But let me tell you what really happened when you said, "It ends with me." You didn't just break a curse. You turned that curse into a cautionary tale. You made every demonic force that ever touched your bloodline regret the day they decided to mess with heaven's chosen vessel. Romans 8:28 promises us that all things work together for good to those who love God. But you, warrior, you took that scripture and turned it into a weapon. You took every generational trauma, every inherited wound, every family secret that was supposed to bury you, and you used it as fertilizer for the very tree that would shade your children and their children. You weren't just fighting your battle, beloved. You ended a war your ancestors never got to finish. Every great-grandmother who died with addiction, every grandfather who carried rage he couldn't release, every aunt who suffered in silence, they're all standing in heaven's gallery right now, applauding your victory, because you fought the fight they never had the tools to win. The enemy thought he was destroying your family line. What he actually did was prepare the soil for the most powerful generation your bloodline has ever seen. Your children won't struggle with what you struggled with, not because life will be easy, but because you already fought that battle and won. So when people ask you why you're so different, when they wonder why you don't operate like the rest of your family, when they can't understand how you broke free from patterns that enslaved generations before you, you tell them this: I'm not the victim of my bloodline's history, I'm the author of its future. If you're the one in your bloodline who said, "It ends with me," if you're the curse breaker, the pattern interrupter, the generational game changer, type curse breaker in the comments right now, because what you've done is nothing short of miraculous, and heaven wants to make sure you know it. But this victory you've claimed, this freedom you've won, it's not just about breaking what was broken. You've been equipped for something far greater, something that's about to transform not just your bloodline, but every life you touch. You know what broke them more than any argument you could have given? Your refusal to argue at all. They came at you with accusations, lies wrapped in concern, passive, aggressive texts disguised as care. They baited you with provocations designed to make you explode, to make you defend yourself, to drag you down into the mud where they could call you dirty. But you did something that absolutely shattered their strategy. You said nothing. And that silence, dear chosen one, was not weakness. It was warfare. Let me ask you something that's going to cut deep. How many times did people mistake your peace for surrender? How many times did they think your stillness meant you had nothing to say? How many times did they celebrate what they thought was your defeat, only to realize later that you had simply refused to play their game? They don't understand the power you discovered in that silence. While they were screaming into the void, demanding your attention, begging for your reaction, you learned something that only the truly awakened ever grasp. You don't have to defend truth. Truth defends itself. Jesus himself demonstrated this divine strategy. When he stood before Pilate, when the governor pressed him for answers, when the crowd demanded he speak in his own defense, what did Christ do? But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Matthew 27-14. The Son of God, the Word made flesh, chose silence. Not because he couldn't speak, but because his silence spoke louder than any defense ever could. You see, they needed your reaction to survive. Their entire identity was built on provoking others, on creating chaos, on feeding off the energy of conflict. But you starved their game. You refused to give them the food they craved. Your silence became a famine to their dysfunction. Buddha understood this too. Under the Bodhi tree, when Mara the tempter came with every distraction, every fear, every doubt, Buddha didn't argue with the demons. He simply touched the earth and remained still. That stillness, that unshakable peace, defeated every weapon formed against him. You didn't react. Chosen one, you recalibrated. While they were throwing stones, you were building an impenetrable fortress of inner peace. While they were screaming, you were listening to the voice of God. While they were demanding answers, you were receiving revelation. And now they don't know why their darts don't land anymore. They throw the same old insults, the same manipulations, the same guilt trips that used to send you spiraling, and they bounce off you like raindrops off a mountain. They can't understand how you became so untouchable. It's because you learned the secret that only the chosen ever discover. The most powerful weapon in spiritual warfare is not your sword, it's your stillness. Think about this. David could have killed Saul when he had the chance, twice. But instead, he chose restraint. He cut off a piece of Saul's robe and said, "I will not lift my hand against my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed." 1 Samuel 24-10. David's restraint, his refusal to retaliate, eventually led to his throne. You chose the same path. When they came for your reputation, you didn't defend it. When they attacked your character, you didn't counterattack. When they tried to provoke you into proving yourself, you did something far more devastating. You proved you didn't need to prove anything. And that broke their entire system. You see, people who live off drama suffocate when you refuse to react. They need your anger to validate their chaos. They need your defense to justify their attack. They need your participation in their game to feel powerful. But you walked away from the chessboard entirely. You refused to play a game where the rules were rigged against your peace. Your silence wasn't passive, it was prophetic. It wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. It wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Every time you chose not to respond to their provocations, you were making a declaration. Your opinion of me is not my reality. Your attack on my character is not my truth. Your attempt to pull me into chaos is not my calling. And do you know what happened? Your silence became so loud it echoed through their conscience. Your peace became so threatening it exposed their chaos. Your stillness became so powerful it shook their foundation. They don't know how to fight someone who won't fight back. They don't know how to defeat someone who won't play defense. They don't know how to break someone who's already found their unbreakable center. Proverbs 26-4 says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him." You discovered this wisdom before you even read it. You intuitively knew that engaging with foolishness would make you foolish. So you chose elevation over explanation. You chose peace over proving points. You chose your sanity over their satisfaction. And now look where you are. While they're still throwing punches at shadows, you're walking in a dimension they can't even see. While they're still fighting yesterday's battles, you're already living in tomorrow's victory. Your silence didn't just protect you, it transformed you. It didn't just guard your peace, it became your power. If you ever stayed quiet just to guard your peace, if you ever chose stillness over strife, if you ever let your silence speak louder than your words, type "stillness is strategy" in the comments below. Because what you're about to discover in the next part will show you that your silence wasn't just a shield, it was a sword. And that sword is about to cut through every lie they told about your supposed defeat. But first, you need to understand something even more powerful than your silence. You didn't just refuse to play their game, you broke their entire system by becoming something they could never touch. You know what infuriates me? When people look at your life right now and call it a comeback story, when they act like you're some underdog who got lucky, like you crawled back from the dead and surprised everyone, including yourself. Let me tell you something that's going to shake you to your core. This isn't a comeback. This is a coronation. You didn't rise from the ashes. You were never ashes to begin with. You were gold being refined in the fire, and every flame that tried to consume you only burned away what wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. While they were planning your funeral, heaven was scheduling your coronation ceremony. Look at David, the shepherd boy who spent years running for his life in caves, hiding from King Saul who wanted him dead. The world saw a fugitive, a man whose best days were behind him, someone whose anointing had clearly been a mistake. But here's what they missed. Those caves weren't hideouts, they were preparation chambers. Every day in the wilderness wasn't punishment, it was boot camp for a king. 1 Samuel 16:13 tells us, "So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed David in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David." Did you catch that? From that day on. Not from the day he killed Goliath, not from the day he became king, from the day he was anointed in private, in front of people who didn't even believe in him. That's you right now. You were anointed years ago, decades ago, maybe even before you knew what anointing meant. And everything since then, every betrayal, every setback, every moment people wrote you off, it wasn't delaying your destiny, it was developing your character for the crown you were always meant to wear. But here's where it gets controversial, and I need you to hear this clearly. Some of you are still living like refugees when you should be walking like royalty. You're still explaining yourself to people who couldn't see your worth when you were broken. Why do you think they'll recognize your value now that you're whole? Stop apologizing for taking up space. Stop shrinking to make other people comfortable. Stop acting like your success needs their permission or their understanding. You want to know the difference between a comeback and a coronation. A comeback means you fell. A coronation means you were always destined to rise. A comeback is about returning to where you were. A coronation is about stepping into who you've always been. They were measuring your coffin while you were blueprinting your crown. They were calculating your defeat while heaven was orchestrating your victory. They were writing your obituary while God was writing your biography. And here's the part that's going to make some people uncomfortable. Your elevation isn't an accident, it's an appointment. Your success isn't luck, it's lineage. You didn't get blessed because you deserved it. You got blessed because you were chosen for it before you ever drew your first breath. Ephesians 1:4 declares, "For he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight." Before the world existed, before time began, before your parents even met, your name was already written in the book of life with a crown next to it. So when people act shocked by your breakthrough, When they can't understand how you went from broken to blessed, seemingly overnight, remind them that nothing about your story was overnight. You've been in preparation for 50, 60, 70 years for this moment. Every tear was an investment. Every trial was training. Every trauma was tuition paid in advance for the wisdom you carry now. But let me ask you something that might sting a little. Are you still waiting for their approval to wear the crown that heaven already placed on your head? Are you still seeking validation from people who never had the authority to validate you in the first place? Because here's what I've learned in 5 decades of watching God move. The same people who doubted your calling will try to take credit for your coronation. The same voices that said you'd never amount to anything will suddenly want to be part of your success story. Don't let them rewrite history. They didn't see you when you were building in silence. They don't get to celebrate you when you're reigning in public. Your coronation isn't revenge against those who hurt you. It's revelation of who you've always been. It's not about proving them wrong. It's about proving God right. It's not about getting back at your enemies. It's about getting back to your identity as heaven's royalty. And if you can feel this truth resonating in your bones right now, if something deep inside you is saying, "This is my time, this is my moment, this is my coronation," then type "crowned" in the comments below. Let heaven and earth witness that you're ready to step fully into the royalty you were born to carry. But here's the question that's going to determine everything that happens next. Now that you know your royalty, now that you understand this is your coronation and not your comeback, what are you going to do with the authority heaven just handed you? You know what they don't tell you about storms? Chosen one. They don't tell you that the most violent tempests in nature aren't random acts of destruction. They're Earth's way of redistributing power, of moving energy from where it's stagnant to where it's needed most. And that storm that nearly destroyed you, that wasn't chaos. That was heaven's strategic deployment. They weren't fighting you. They were fighting the force behind you. Have you ever wondered why the attacks felt so personal? Why the betrayals cut so deep? Why it seemed like every time you tried to step into your purpose, every time you got close to your breakthrough, the resistance intensified tenfold? Here's the truth that's going to rewire everything you thought you knew about your suffering. The enemy wasn't trying to destroy you because you were weak. He was trying to bury you because he saw the weapon you were becoming. Think about this for a moment. Really think about it. When do armies mobilize their heaviest artillery? When they're facing their greatest threat. When do they call in reinforcements? When they're terrified of what's coming. The intensity of the attack was never about your failure. It was about your future. They saw something in you that you hadn't even discovered yet. Let me paint you a picture, and I want you to see this clearly in your mind's eye. Lightning doesn't strike randomly. It follows the path of least resistance, seeking the highest point, the strongest conductor. When that bolt of electricity tears through the darkness, it doesn't destroy the mountain. It illuminates it, reveals its true height, shows the world what was always there but hidden in shadow. The lightning didn't strike you. It illuminated your calling. Every betrayal, every financial collapse, every health crisis, every moment when you felt like you were drowning in circumstances beyond your control, that wasn't punishment. That was revelation. You weren't being buried. You were being unearthed. Heaven was using the very forces that meant to destroy you, to strip away everything that wasn't essentially you, everything that was hiding the weapon you were born to be. Isaiah 43:2 doesn't just offer comfort, it offers strategy. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned, the flames will not set you ablaze. Notice it doesn't say if you pass through. It says when. The storm was always part of the plan, but so was your survival. Here's what the enemy didn't calculate. Every attack that should have destroyed you only refined you. Every betrayal that should have made you bitter only made you better. Every loss that should have left you broken only left you rebuilt with materials they couldn't recognize, couldn't touch, couldn't corrupt. Have you ever felt like the attack wasn't about what you did, but about what you were carrying? Like they could sense something in you that even you didn't fully understand? That's because you've been walking around with a frequency that terrifies the kingdom of darkness. You carry something that can't be faked, can't be taught, can't be replicated. Authenticity forged in fire. Think about David in that cave, hiding from Saul, probably wondering if God had forgotten his promises. The enemy saw a shepherd boy running for his life, but heaven saw a king in training. Every night David spent in that cave, every psalm he wrote in the darkness, every moment he chose worship over worry. He was being prepared for a throne he couldn't even imagine yet. Your cave wasn't your burial ground, it was your boot camp. The trauma that made you feel invisible to people made you visible to heaven. The pain that made you question your worth made heaven confirm your value. The seasons when you felt completely alone were the seasons when you were being personally trained by the Spirit of the living God. But here's where this gets really powerful, and I need you to lean in because this is going to change how you see your entire journey. The storm wasn't sent to reveal you to yourself, although that was part of it. The storm was sent to reveal you to your assignment. Every person you're called to impact, every life you're meant to change, every door you're destined to open, they needed to see that you had walked through fire and come out refined, not consumed. Your scars aren't your shame, they're your credentials. Your survival isn't lucky, it's strategic. Heaven needed you battle-tested, storm-proven, unshakable, because what you're about to step into requires someone who can't be intimidated by opposition, can't be discouraged by resistance, can't be moved by the opinions of people who've never walked through what you've walked through. The enemy thought he was burying you, but all he did was plant you. And now you're about to bloom in ways that will terrify every force that tried to stop you. If the storm revealed you, if you can feel the weapon you've become stirring in your spirit, type unbreakable in the comments. Because chosen one, you didn't just survive the storm, you absorbed its power. And speaking of power, what happens when someone who's been forged in fire finally realizes they're not just unbreakable, but they're also untouchable? You know what's fascinating about mirrors? They don't lie, they don't apologize, they don't adjust their reflection to make people comfortable. They simply reveal what is. And that, chosen one, is exactly what you became the moment you started healing. Here's what nobody warned you about when you began your journey toward wholeness. Your peace would become other people's prison sentence. Your joy would expose their emptiness. Your calm would reveal their chaos. And suddenly, the very people who claimed they wanted you to get better started acting like your healing was a personal attack against them. Let me ask you something that might sting a little. Have you ever noticed how some people got angry when you stopped complaining? How they grew distant when you stopped feeding their drama? How they accused you of changing the moment you refused to stay broken for their comfort? That wasn't coincidence. That was spiritual physics in action. See, light doesn't just illuminate beautiful things, it reveals everything. When Jesus walked into the temple in Matthew 21, he didn't come to make friends with the money changers. His very presence, his righteousness, his divine authority exposed their corruption so clearly that they couldn't stand to be in the same room with him. The light of his holiness made their darkness unbearable. And that's exactly what happened to you. Your healing became a mirror that reflected back to them everything they refused to face about themselves. Your growth highlighted their stagnation. Your peace magnified their turmoil. Your breakthrough exposed their excuses. And instead of looking in that mirror and saying, "Maybe I need to change," they tried to shatter the reflection. They weren't offended by your success, chosen one. They were exposed by your serenity. Think about the Apostle Paul standing in Athens in Acts 17. He didn't raise his voice, didn't throw insults, didn't attack anyone personally. He simply spoke truth with such clarity, such divine authority, that it split the entire city. Some believed, others mocked, but nobody could remain neutral in the presence of that light. Your transformation did the same thing. It created a division that exposed who people really were when faced with genuine change. The ones who celebrated your growth revealed their authentic love. The ones who resented your healing revealed their authentic character. But here's where it gets deeper, and this might hurt. Some of the people who turned on you weren't strangers. They were family members who preferred you wounded, friends who needed you smaller, church folks who were comfortable with your struggles because it made them feel better about their own, co-workers who liked you better when you were the office victim they could pity. Your healing disrupted their entire ecosystem. When you stopped being their project, their charity case, their emotional dumping ground, they didn't know how to relate to you anymore. When you set boundaries, they called you cold. When you chose peace over drama, they called you fake. When you refused to carry their pain along with your own, they called you selfish. But let me tell you what really happened. You became too healthy for their sickness, too whole for their brokenness, too aligned for their chaos, and that terrified them because your very existence proved that change was possible, that healing was real, that they had no excuse for staying stuck. In John 8:12, Jesus declared, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness." But notice what happened immediately after that declaration. The Pharisees started plotting to kill him. Why? Because his light exposed their religious performance, their hypocrisy, their spiritual emptiness. Your light did the same thing. When you started walking in divine authority, when you began speaking with heaven's confidence, when you refused to shrink back into the broken version of yourself they were comfortable with, you became dangerous to their delusions. Your serenity became their sentence. Your wholeness became their conviction. And here's the part that probably confused you the most. The attacks got worse after you got better. The criticism intensified after your breakthrough. The isolation deepened after your healing. You wondered, why is this happening now? I thought things would get easier once I was whole. But that's exactly how spiritual warfare works. The enemy doesn't fear your brokenness, he fears your wholeness. Demons don't tremble at your wounds, they flee from your worship. Hell doesn't panic when you're down, it goes into crisis mode when you rise. As we reach the end of this sacred journey together, I need you to remember 3 unshakable truths that heaven has spoken over your life today. First, you already won. Not because the battle was easy, not because the pain wasn't real, but because the one who called you is faithful to complete what he started. Your victory was sealed before your first breath, written before your first tear, confirmed before your first doubt. Second, every season of silence, every moment of struggle, every day you felt forgotten was actually divine preparation. What looked like abandonment was positioning. What felt like punishment was refinement. What seemed like rejection was protection. You weren't being overlooked. You were being prepared for a revelation so profound that it required a foundation only suffering could build. Third, you are not the same person who began this journey. You have been transformed, not just improved, not just healed, but fundamentally changed. The old you, the one who questioned your worth, who begged for validation, who carried everyone else's pain as your own, that version died in the process. What emerged is a chosen vessel, a divine weapon, a mirror of heaven's glory that no earthly force can tarnish. But let me remind you of something crucial. You are not walking this path alone. There is a God who sees every step, who counts every tear, who turns every setback into a setup for his glory. And there is a community, right here, right now, of chosen ones who understand your journey because they've walked it too. In the comments below, I want you to share one word, just one word, that describes how you feel right now after receiving this confirmation. Whether it's grateful or overwhelmed or ready or peaceful, let your voice be heard, because someone else scrolling through these comments needs to see that they're not alone in what they're feeling. And if this message touched something deep in your spirit, if it confirmed what your heart already knew but your mind struggled to believe, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to hear these words, because there's someone in your circle, in your family, in your community, who is still living in the echo of a war that's already over. They need to know that their victory is just as real, just as certain, just as sealed as yours. Before we close, I want to ask you one question that will determine how you walk from this moment forward. Now that you know you've already won, now that you understand your struggle was preparation, now that you see your victory was always guaranteed, what are you going to do with this revelation? Let me pray with you, not just for you, but with you, as someone who understands the weight of this calling. Heavenly Father, I place my hand on the shoulder of every chosen one listening to these words. You see them in their homes, in their cars, in their moments of solitude, carrying this message in their hearts. Lord, they have endured what others couldn't survive. They have walked through fires that would have consumed lesser souls. They have carried burdens that were never meant to be theirs, yet they carried them with grace. Father, I pray that you would release them now from every chain of doubt, every whisper of unworthiness, every echo of past pain that tries to tell them they're not enough. Let them feel your hand upon their lives, your breath in their lungs, your purpose in their heartbeat. Open doors that no man can shut. Restore what was stolen, multiply what was sacrificed, honor what was sown in tears with a harvest of joy. Let their latter days be greater than their former days. Let their influence expand, their peace deepen, their joy overflow. Surround them with divine connections, people who see their worth, who celebrate their growth, who partner with their purpose. Remove every voice that speaks defeat, and amplify every voice that speaks destiny. And Lord, as they step into this new understanding of who they are, let them never forget that their victory blesses others. Let their healing become a highway for someone else's breakthrough. Let their testimony become a weapon against every lie the enemy tells. We thank you that it is finished. We thank you that they have already won. We thank you that their future is as secure as their salvation. In Jesus' mighty name, we declare it, we receive it, we walk in it. Amen. To every single one of you who stayed until the end, who received these words into your spirit, who chose to believe what heaven says about you rather than what hell whispers, thank you. Thank you for your time, your attention, your open heart. If this message has changed something in you, if you're ready to walk in the victory you've always carried, subscribe to this channel, because this is just the beginning. There are more revelations coming, more confirmations waiting, more layers of your identity that heaven wants to unveil. You are chosen. You are loved. You are victorious. And most importantly, you are not alone. Now go walk like the winner you've always been.